When will you see your first snow of this upcoming season? Let's first take you back. What happened last year? Here's your overall seasonal snowfall accumulation, essentially from September 30th of this time last year. You can see based on the graph at the bottom right hand corner of the screen, all these areas in orange and yellow had well above average snowfall, and likely those higher elevation areas across the Intermountain West, much of the areas of Sahara saw really abundance amount of snow, and those areas across New England, especially in the higher elevations, saw above average snows. But once you got into the kind of the red shaded areas, the magenta shaded areas of those 20 and almost 40-inch totals, these totals were actually below average, what you would typically expect for an overall season. And that snow line continued to transfer further south. Even the Texas Panhandle picked up some pretty good snows, but you can see it really starting to wane as you got down to Oklahoma, much of Arkansas, back into Tennessee. And if you did in fact get any snow across these regions into the white, it just really didn't accumulate. So there were sporadic areas that did pick up a dusting to an inch or two, but it just didn't accumulate on the ground. So what happens this year? So it's not usually out of the question that, especially across the Intermountain West regions in the month of September, which is what we saw, this is the last 30 days of snowfall accumulations in some of these areas across Idaho and to Montana, back into Colorado, sporadic areas of Utah, back into Nevada, as well as into portions of the Saharas, they've actually already seen some snow. In fact, we've had even some of these higher elevations. I mean, you're talking above 5, literally above 7, mainly 10,000 feet up that they've actually seen some snow. So it's definitely not out of the ordinary to see snow this early on into the season. And of course, now we're transferring into the month of October, and this is typically, you got to have your first frost, right? You got to have your first frost before you get your first snow. And most of these areas across areas in the blue have already kind of seen those temperatures dip down at some point throughout the month of 35 degrees and lower. But now that we're going into that October timeframe, from now until the end of the month, we're going to start to see more cold fronts in a shortened basis on a more regularly basis. We're going to be starting to see that freeze line dip even further south. So now all these areas in purple do expect to see your first frost for those areas across New Mexico, eastern areas of Colorado, into Kansas, back into Nebraska, Iowa, back into Missouri, dipping further south into the Illinois region, into Ohio, as well as into Kentucky and portions of Tennessee. It's really not until you get into November, really after Halloween, for these areas into pink to see their first frost of the season, as you'll get colder air and that jet stream starts to buckle just a little bit further south. That puts the freeze line a little bit further south. So do expect these areas to get your first frost sometime after Halloween, getting into portions of Texas, as well as into Oklahoma, portions of Arkansas, and further south into the southeast as well. And it's really not until after that, and some areas don't even actually get to freezing, well to the south of South Texas and the far outskirts of the I-10 corridor, well into the south and the southern tip of Florida. So when do you expect your first snowfall of the season? So I already kind of showed you when where the snow actually fell so far this year, this season. Now it's going to be expanded areas of the Intermountain West. We're still in October, so from now until Halloween, yes, do expect more colder air intrusions, but especially these Intermountain West regions to expand. So all these areas are highlighted into the gray area. Do expect more snow to fall across these areas into Idaho, back into Wyoming, as well as into Colorado, and then far sporadic portions of the higher elevations. But it's not until you get to November, that especially that first half of November, you'll definitely start to see more cold air intrusions coming in and bringing the freeze line further south and bringing more precipitation along with it. And that will mix in with the colder air and brings those snowfall elevations further south as well. So now we're talking snow into portions of Nebraska, as well as in the northern areas of Wisconsin, getting into Michigan here, the further back into New England. But once you get into these deep purples, you're talking towards the Thanksgiving time frame, right? So Thanksgiving time frame, that will push it just a little bit further south. So yes, we'll start to include southern portions of Nebraska, those areas in western areas of Kansas, back into, say, the Chicago region, into Cleveland, Cleveland, Ohio areas. Those areas will start to see your first accumulating snows of the season. And, once we get into that December, the 1st time frame, and that first half of December, so now we're talking those lighter shaded areas into the blue down here into the Texas Panhandle, not out of the question to see your first snow of the season, back into further south into Kansas, even into western areas of Oklahoma. Can't rule out some first snows of the season by then, in the northern and central areas of Missouri, back into central Illinois, and that'll dip further south into areas of West Virginia. But as we transfer towards, Christmas time, that second half of December definitely pushes it even further south. So now we're talking, say areas of possibly the Childress region, some of the higher elevations, the Paladora Canyons up here, far western areas of West Texas. Can't even roll out even, areas of Tulsa even could see some snow starting to fly by then towards the Christmas time frame. Northern areas of, Arkansas. But definitely after you get after the first of the year, you start putting more of these southern areas back into play, because obviously the jet stream just dips just a little bit further south. You'll have more congruent systems come out west. You'll have more colder intrusions come in from the north. And a lot of times that mixing could push the snow line even further south. So that puts it in some areas into West Texas. You're talking, the January, February timeframe by then. Southern portions of Oklahoma, back into including most of Arkansas by then. Now it'll include portions of northern Mississippi, back into Alabama, getting into the northern areas of Georgia, as well as into North Carolina, southern Carolina. And then if you see any snow, after that, this would likely be in your February timeframe. So from that February 1st to that, that first half of February, this is typically, if you were going to be seeing some snow for this upcoming winter, some sporadic snows, this is when that time frame would likely be, within that 2 to 3 week time frame in the month of February. And then of course, as you get further south, you just a lot of times you just don't even get any snow. There's not out of the question, some years you can get some snow if your colder air intrusions time in with some of those areas that come in from the west. But overall, I wouldn't expect much of anything if you live in a good part of Florida for this upcoming winter. So overall, what are your accumulations that kind of that you typically see? So obviously you would expect in some of the higher elevations of seeing those well above 100 plus inch snowfall totals, especially along those lake effect areas, into the higher mountains, intermountain regions, those 5 to 7 foot thousand, mountain tops out there. But once you get below that, so these areas in blue, so I do expect where you were below average in snowfall last year across much of Montana and Wyoming, and to much of Nebraska, getting into Minnesota, Wisconsin. I do actually expect a lot more snow for you guys this year. In fact, even above average snows that I'm expecting for this upcoming region across those areas. And then further south, you'll definitely get some lighter amounts, but you can still get some foot to 18 inch totals. Southern Nebraska, getting into Iowa, back into central and central Illinois areas. And of course that snow line pushes it further south. And again, what we kind of went over, it's not really until after the first of the year, these areas will be a lot more likely. If you're going to be getting any snow this year, it would likely be in that time frame, getting into New Mexico by then, back into Texas. It does include Oklahoma into Arkansas, much of Tennessee. These areas in gray are typically less than 6 inches of snow for any given season. So yes, but then again, would likely be your January, February timeframe, and of course further south it would likely be in those just 2 to 3 week window of that February 1st to say that third week of February if you're going to get any snow for this upcoming season. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update while I protect you before and after the storm.